welcome back to my channel, Yejidé Books. I'm Camilla. We're nearing the end of the year and lots of people are sharing their best books of 2022. So obviously I had to make my own list, and that was a really fun video to make last year actually. I really enjoyed, just looking back at my year and seeing what are the books that really had an impact on me. It was really difficult to bring it down to 10 books. I wanted to do 10 books, I think it's a good number. My first draft had 20 and I was like trying really hard to bring it down to 10, so to be a concise list. I read over 120 books this year so far, and I'm trying to read at least 3 in the next 10 days to finish, before the end of the year. But I have put my top 10 and I've made a sort of order. And before we head into this list, I just wanted to do a shout out to this shirt that I really love. My husband laughed quite a lot when I got it. My mom got it for me for Christmas and I really enjoy it, and it's very true. I have no self-control. We're talking about going to a bookshop tomorrow as well, so it's great. But yeah, I love it, and I think it's really nice to have a little thematic book shirt, to do these videos. But yeah, anyway, let's dive into this list. In number 10 we have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is a classic of American literature that I think everyone who, I guess, grows up in English reads in like school or whatever. Obviously I grew up in French, so never read this book. It didn't kind of come up in university either, obviously. So I put it on my classics TBR for 2022 and I got to it in like May or something. I was a bit skeptical of it. I went into it knowing that everyone's always like, oh, it's good, it's a classic. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how good, how powerful, how universal, and how modern the themes of this book are. So obviously we're following mostly in the eyes of a child, which is also kind of taking us into a more like naive and vulnerable state. And her father is defending a black man who's been accused, I want to say, of murder. I mean, I've forgotten the details, but anyway. And it's very unfair, and I think you get even more of that unfairness because the character, even the narrator, is a child. But yeah, it was really beautiful. It's a book that I definitely recommend, even if you're skeptical of it. I think it's a must read. In number 9 we have Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, another book that was on my classics TBR for 2022. This book is the 5th, I believe, in publication. I tried to read all 9 novels this year, but I didn't make it. I've only made it 5. And that was the last one. And for me, that really peaked at that point. I've kind of been a bit confused by her novels up to now and just not really that taken in. But this one, I really felt this story and I really got pulled into these characters, and it's mostly based over the course of one day. So Mrs. Dalloway, the main character and sort of main narrator as well, is trying to arrange a ball, and then a man that she used kind of like comes back from abroad and she reminisces as well, and he reminisces as well. It's juxtaposed with the story of a lower class man who's a veteran, who's come back from the war, and he ends up killing himself. And the juxtaposition of very like rich Edwardian life with that, and also there's quite a lot of much more kind of obvious queerness into this book as well. I think that up to now this has been one of my favorite Virginia Woolf. We shall see what the others bring. But yeah, I thought this was a highlight of my year and I was really highly pleased with this. In number 8 we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This is a fantasy novel based on Chinese lore and mythology. So we have the main character who is the daughter of the moon goddess, and she gets exiled as a way to kind of save her mother because her mother agreed not to have children, I believe. And so she goes and she tries to make her own way, and she wants to save her mother, I think from the emperor who's keeping her as basically a prisoner. So we have her kind of journey growing up, so it's kind of a bit of coming of age and coming into her own. It's really beautiful. I really enjoy this character. I loved her kind of gusto, like I think she was really cool like that. It is part of a duology and I have just found the second one, so I will be reading this early in 2023 and I cannot wait to see where this character and her journey takes us. In number 7 we have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. It's in number 7, but I think it's in my favorite books of the year, and then it was over 120, so It's just that at this point it's getting really tight for the spots. But I really, really love this book. I read this for the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, I guess. It was on the long list and shortlist. And I kind of went in not wanting to like this book because to me it felt extremely like white middle class. But honestly, I was extremely charmed by Meg Mason's writing, by her main character, who is despicable, but I feel like we really go on a journey with her because she gets a diagnosis, like she learns about herself and she learns from her mistakes, and I feel like you really get that understanding and that growth from this character, which I didn't expect at the beginning, and in the second half and especially the last fourth of the book, I was absolutely stunned by how amazing Meg Mason turned the story around this character and her relationships. So yeah, a really, really huge recommend on this one. It was absolutely brilliant. In number 6, we have The Trees by Percival Everett. I read this one for the Booker Prize long list, and I guess for shortlist because it was shortlisted. I really, really loved this book. It was really funny. When I did my review of it, I mentioned how much I laughed, and my husband was like, oh my god, what are you laughing at? And I was trying to explain this book to him about how, it's based highly on lynching, on racism, and the history of violence against Black people in the US. I think that what Percival Everett did was amazing because it took such a serious subject and made it into, I guess it's a bit of a satire. So you have these 2 cops who are going around looking after these murders where a white man gets murdered and there's always a Black man dead next to him. And I think it's based on the Emmett Till murder. And then at some point there's a really powerful chapter where it's all the names of people who have died basically by lynching in the US. Yeah, it was just powerful, touching, hilarious, which you don't expect when looking at this kind of subject. But yeah, I thought it was an absolute must read this year, and I'm really glad that it made it onto the short list, for the prize. And now we are onto my top 5. Very exciting. In number 5, we have Enfants du Lichen, or Children from the Lichen, by Maya Cousineau Mollen. She's an Innu poet from the Quebec region in Canada. And that book actually won the Governor General Award for poetry. So, she did an amazing job, but you don't have just my review to say that it was an excellent book. So it's a poetry book, obviously, by a native author of Canada. And I think it was beautiful, it was powerful as well. Like, I think this has been a theme actually throughout my favorite books, is that there really was something said with these books. And in this poetry collection, it's my favorite poetry collection of the year. And I was really, really taken in by her messaging, but also I thought her writing wasn't too obscure. Sometimes poetry really I feel a bit distant from it because sometimes it just sounds like nonsense and I don't know how to interpret it. But her poetry was very accessible, but really, really, really strong in what it was saying, in its imagery, and in just the kind of wording. So excellent. If it gets translated into English, which I hope it does, I really, really recommend that you grab a copy. In number 4, we have my favorite nonfiction book of the year, Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado Perez. This was a book that I talked about in my nonfiction TBR, and also, I made a review of this book, and it was, I think, my favorite book of the month. Definitely one of my favorite nonfiction of the year, and it's in my top 5 of the year as well. It sounds like it's going to be data heavy because it's something about like the data bias, in a world built for and by men, something like that. And it is. It's extremely based on facts, on data, on real life kind of research around the world, but it's very accessible in the language, in the stories that it tells, how these things came about, the themes throughout the book as well. So I really, really recommend this book. I thought it was so good. I have had it in my library for ages. I'd been intimidated by it and kind of hadn't dived in, but the minute I went for it, it was just incredible, and I'm really glad that I finally read it. In number 3, we have Creatures of Passage by Morowa Yejidé. This was another book that I read for the Women's Prize for Fiction. This was for the long list, and I was absolutely floored by this book. It is extremely difficult to read, and I think a lot of people didn't get past the first half because it has some extremely graphic abuse of children, and I ended up reading it twice. The second time I skipped over all of that. However, the rest of the book was amazing. To me, it's a blend of magical realism, almost like dystopian fiction as well. It's based on like a not quite a real Washington DC, and it's extremely based like in racism and like the poverty line in the US and in Washington DC itself. And it's a family story. It almost feels intergenerational as well because you have different, you know, generations of one family, all interconnected. And honestly, it was incredible. And by the end, I was literally on the edge of my seat reading this book, flipping at the last pages, being like, oh my god, like, and this doesn't happen to me often. I felt almost like a movie, you know, when you're kept, like, you're like, run, or something like that. That kind of reaction that you have, a gut reaction for the character. I had this 100% in this book, and I think it ended on a positive note as well, which I always like. So yeah, to me, it's a highly recommended book. However, it has a lot of trigger warnings, so it's something to go into knowing that. But except for that, I think it's a book worth kind of pursuing and pushing through because it's really, truly excellent. In second place, we have another Women's Prize for Fiction favorite, Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This, I think, was my favorite of the whole Women's Prize this year. And I think that this is what I would have picked as my winner for the year. I thought it was a truly incredible, epic, very long at times, book. Goes over so many parts of like American history as well, which obviously I don't know about that much, but it was really interesting to get that juxtaposed with the personal story on top of it. We follow mostly two storylines, which is the story of a female character born in the early 20th century, and she wants to become a pilot. She does become a pilot. You go over a very, very long kind of stretch of history in the 20th century. You follow also her brother, who is an artist, and his own path and their connection, and it's really beautiful. And then parallel to that, we follow a modern day timeline about an American actress who basically is going to play this woman in a movie about her life. So this character wanted to be the first to circumnavigate the world from pole to pole. So people have done it around, but from pole to pole is more dangerous because also you go to more treacherous weather and stuff like that. That's why, you know, her story becomes really important for the modern day timeline. Anyway, it sounds a bit convoluted to explain it like that, but it's a parallel, you know, storyline with a modern day and a historical timeline. And it's very, very epic, and I didn't love the modern day timeline. I did think by the end it was adding a little bit to it, but I think it could have done without that. But I really, really loved the end as well. I was like crying, and I was just like laughing, and I was hopeful, and I thought it was just really, really beautiful. Yeah, I'm really glad that I read this because of the prize, and it's a big recommend. If you want to read like a really epic modern novel, I think this is one to go for. And finally, my top book of the year, and you won't be surprised to hear this if you've been following my channel for a little bit. It is Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. I read this very early on in the year, and it's really stayed with me, and I've mentioned it so many times. I just thought it was really, really beautiful. It's in the you, so in the second person, which I know kind of jars a little bit some people, but I thought it was really good, and I really got into it quickly once you get used to it. I love how much it touched on art. The female character is a dancer, he's a photographer, and there was so much about being seen and about seeing. And yeah, there's lots of themes. I will link my review up here because I think it's worth kind of looking into some of the themes of this book. It's so short, but I think it's so powerful, and it packs in a punch, and I highly, highly recommend it. And if you've seen my top anticipated read of 2023, you'll see that he has a new novel coming out in 2023, and I cannot wait to read it because this was truly my favorite novel of the year, and I can't wait to revisit it actually. And finally, I just wanted to do a quick shout out to a couple extra books because, you know, I struggle to keep it down to 10 books, but I will just do a quick shout out. You can go and look them up if you like. The first one is The Story of a Seagull and the Cat Who Taught Her to Fly by Luis Sepulveda. The Crossing by Manjeet Mann. The Colony by Audrey Maggie, Taste by Stanley Tucci, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Café by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and finally the two books I'm currently reading, which is Piranesi by Susanna. I'm really enjoying it. I'm almost halfway and honestly it's incredible. And obviously a huge highlight of the year has been Conte Monte Cristo. I have quite a few hundred pages to go. I have 10 days. I've calculated if I do 50 pages a day before the end of the year, I will be finished this year. So I'm working on this really hard, but it's been really good. I'm really enjoying it, so I want to shout them out as well. And that's it for my favorite books of 2022. Oh my god, incredible. I can't believe we're almost finished with another year. Tell me, please, what was your favorite book of the year? What is it that you thought, really struck you about it? I cannot wait to hear. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, did you enjoy them? Did you not? I would love to know your opinion. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and hey, see you back. Bye!